Today is Monday, the 8th of December, 2025. We are on Tawheed Halaqah 59. We are on page 129,
Or
chapter
volume.
13, volume 3, chapter 29. Sorry, chapter 13, page 129. The chapter is titled Contradictory Definitions of Al-Muallimi. So this is the Ibadah Ma'bud
Yeah.
discussion. It was coined by him. Okay.
I said because he's a major man and his book is so voluminous and so on, people may get really worried that he did something. He's just wavering around. It doesn't. I think our definition when we understand ibadah, translated properly to English, that's enslaving oneself. It is essentially a two sides of the coin related to obedience. It has nothing to do with the rituals, sujood, ruku, all of that. Nothing. Has nothing to ask someone to give you something, even if this something is ghaibi, like someone commenting on the Mu'allim say, what about if someone come to Isa in his time and say, please cure my son, directly asking him. This is usually, or turn my blind son into seeing or something like that. This is matlab, which is obviously seems to be breaking the natural law, and he's addressing Isa directly. The question is what he believes in Isa. Believes Isa is divine, that is the shirk. If he believes he's a messenger and Allah gave him his power, that's not shirk. That's highly desirable, respecting Isa. And according to him, Hatim al-Awni respond to him in this example because he says ultimately after 600 pages, he say it is a matter of talab min Allah, matlab ghaibi, something of ghaib. Again, ghaib is not well defined. What's ghaib? So it is just they want to save a point of view, which is very obvious in Quran. That is not the case. Everything goes back to i'tiqad in uluhiyya or some aspects of uluhiyya. If you have that, then we can classify the act as ibadah or worship or whatever. If it is not, it is just respect or honoration or something. Simple, straightforward, as simple as that. And they were but these people who are grown, obviously, in the Wahhabi methodology and so on, and school, they will never be able to do because they come from the end. And in any discourse, scientific, you start from the basic and simple to the up. If you start from the end and go back, then most likely you will miss something. Especially if you start with how the people of Nuh are doing, how people is doing. Most of that we don't know. And most narration are just guesswork and so on. Nobody was there to see what they're doing. And then even worse, nobody knows what they intended, what their belief was in detail and so on. So you start with the complex and go to the simple, that's the wrong way. You will be going astray in any matter, even in physics and chemistry and so on. Yeah, in every branch of discourse. Oh, let's read.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I decided to give it some space here more. Maybe in the edited version, I would say I just make a general response and give some examples and then carry on.
Okay. So page 129. At this juncture, it is an appropriate time to review and clarify the existing flaws in the definition of al-ilah, God, deity, and ibadah, worship, as it has been set out by Abdurrahman al-Muallimi. May Allah have mercy upon him. To begin, the definition of ilah is set out in the works of al-Muallimi as follows, where he writes, number one, with regards to al-ilah, God, deity, it is al-ma'bud, one that is worshipped. Whomsoever worships something has taken it as an ilah, even if they don't claim that it is mustahiq lil ibad, worthy of worship.
So this is a catastrophe. This is what we classified earlier as a statement of kufr. Remember that? Defining it as al-ma'bud.
That applies, for example, to those who hope for some worldly benefit deriving therefrom or similar motivation as previously outlined. Number two, whoever claims that something is mustahiq lil ibadah, worthy, deserving of worship, has worshipped it by way of this claim, as it entails a form of submission that inherently seeks a hidden benefit. By doing this, they have made it an ilah. Similarly, whoever affirms for something an independent authority in creation, provision, or similar acts, has linked this authority to the basis of deserving worship, as has been previously established. Likewise, Whoever affirms that something can intercede without permission and that its intercession is never rejected has ascribed to it a form of independent authority in a manner akin to independent governance.
Now he's going from benefits and so on into asking for shafa'a, independent and so on. So he's discussing divine attributes. So again, he's sometimes in East, sometimes in West. But from the first definition, Ilah al-Ma'bud is finished. Game over. Khalas, finished. That's the wrong definition, fundamental. Because we discussed previously, you remember, we discussed either Ilah is first defined in Ibadah depending upon the concept of Ilah, or Ibadah is the primary thing, which is the list of action and so on. That's what he's doing here. And Ilah, the entity to which these actions are directed. Otherwise, it's not. And then the circular argument and so on, or the two independent definition, which makes no sense. So we discussed all these four logical options. Relation of the concept of uluhiyya and ibadah. Either uluhiyya is primary, ibadah is secondary, or ibadah is primary, uluhiyya is secondary, or both of them secondary and then this is circular, or they are independent, which also contradict Quran and Sunnah. We discussed in the previous chapter. So we don't need, but anyway, let's continue. I don't know if I have made a very long comment on that or a short one. Carry on, let's see what he says.
Number 3, as for the meaning of ilah, in the phrase of testimony, it signifies mustahiq lil ibad, the one deserving of worship, or if you prefer, you may say that which pure intellect independently perceives as being worthy of submission in pursuit of an unseen benefit. Thus, Allah the Exalted is deserving of worship, and sound reason independently recognizes his deservingness to be submitted to in pursuit of unseen benefit. The Mushrikeen, however, claimed that idols and other things they worship were similarly deserving. They did not make such claims about the Kaaba or the Black Stone because they believed that their reverence for these was only by Allah's command. Therefore, they did not call the Kaaba a god, nor did they describe their reverence for it as worship. That's from Muallimi. This is your commentary now. In addition to the above, the definition as it purported relates to al-ibadah has also been outlined in his works, where he states the refined articulation of the definition of worship is as follows: voluntary submission through which an unseen benefit is sought.
That's what I mentioned. Isa asking Isa to treat your son, and things like that.
Regarding the matter of submission, as has stated, this encompasses both the notion of ta'ah, obedience, and tazim, reverence. The voluntary excludes all that would be coerced and matters in similar circumstances, as shall be detailed in the section on legal excuses, if Allah wills. Concerning the matter of an unseen benefit, it signifies that it is of such a nature that it includes a, the one who actively seeks having an actual belief, assumption, or even a mere possibility that this submission is a means to attaining an unseen benefit. B, the one who is considered a seeker, such as when a particular act is customarily performed for the sake of obtaining an unseen benefit. An example of this is prostration before an idol, even if the one prostrating does so out of defiance, as was the case with Pharaoh and his people. Alternatively, if one prostrates out of fear of harm, that does not amount to coercion, as was previously discussed in the opening of this treatise, in reference to the oppressed believers who expressed themselves to potential coercion out of reluctance to immigrate, which would have required them to abandon their homes, family, and wealth and families, or if one prostrates in flattery, which is a lesser evil than the previous one. This is as indicated by the verse of Allah, exalted and majestic, where he says, as has been revealed to you, believers, in the scripture, if you hear people denying and ridiculing Allah's revelation, do not sit with them unless they start to talk of other things, or else you yourselves will become like them. Allah will gather all the hypocrites and disbelievers together in hell. That's Quran 4:140. Or if one prostrates in pursuit of worldly gain, such as the one who is offered a great sum of wealth in exchange for prostrating before an idol, this case being even more severe than that of the one who prostrates out of fear, or if one prostrates in jest and amusement, as is indicated by the verse on coercion, as previously discussed in the opening of the
You see, he's ranking severe, non-severe. We are not discussing it. Is it ibadah or not ibadah? That's what we're discussing. So he's going now to ranking and levels. Again, Ibn Taymiyyah's error that ibadah is the extreme of submission mixed with the extreme of love, which is wrong again. We discussed that area also. Yeah, carry on. That's his
thing. Just you commenting verbatim from what Ibn Taymiyyah says, because it doesn't. I thought this might be your commentary.
Which one?
This commentary, what I'm reading out right now, because the way it's formatted, I thought it was your
commentary. No, that's al-Muallimi talking.
Oh, I see. So they need to indent it further then.
Yeah, that's al-Muallimi.
Okay, so that's still Muallimi. Okay, okay.
It should be clear with parentheses or indentation or something like that.
Yeah, or if one prostrates in jest and the Islamic legal jurists affirm that such an act constitutes apostasy in relation to benefit. This term is intended to include the matter of preventing harm regarding unseen. Its explanation has been outlined already. This is a definition of ibadah in its general sense. However, if one intends to define worship directly to Allah, exalted and mighty, the phrase bisultan, with authority, is added. Conversely, if one intends to worship define worship directed to other than him.
You see, everything, if you intend to worship, so worship is something independent for him, has nothing to do with the addressee. So for him, worship or ibadah is primary and ilah is secondary. Khalas, that's it. So he's from the first school, no Wahhabi school. All these examples he did and these very complicated phrases, they don't change anything in that. Sometimes he mentions aqidah somehow and so on because he's confused. He cannot get it. That's the problem, because you have to go a little, because they are so interconnected in the speech of humans and so on that people do not notice sometimes the circularity. And if a problem comes, like really what is shirk, what's so on, then you have to check these two concepts of the relationship. As we said, either ilah uluhiyya is primary and ibadah is secondary, or ibadah is primary, that's what the Wahhabi says, and ilah is secondary. Third, both of them secondary and primary, that's a circular, but it's hidden, nobody feels it. And the fourth is the completely independent, and that will create also contradictions to the Quran. Yeah.
Okay. Continuing in relation to the Islamic legal jurists affirm that such an act constitutes apostasy in relation to benefit. This term is intended to include the matter of preventing harm regarding unseen. Its explanation has been outlined already. This is a definition of ibadah in its general sense. However, if one intends to define worship directed to Allah, exalted and mighty, the phrase bisultan, with authority, is added. Conversely, if one intends to define worship directed to other than Allah, the phrase bighayr sultan, without authority, is appended. Moreover,
or just wavering, it doesn't make any sense. Do you make any sense out of that?
Well, it's consistent within their own flaws.
Yeah, that's ibadah is primary and divinity is secondary, and he's trying to give it the meaning that is requesting benefit or harm, trying to get benefit or prevent harm. Ghaibi, not apparent. We want to exclude that. You call someone, hand me the hammer. You want to get benefit. You want the hammer to do some work, but this is not ghaibi. This the man is present and or something like that, or even phone someone in China asking to send some goods. That's not ghaibi. Ghaibi is something which beyond human perception. Somehow in his mind, that's the meaning. Matlab or nafa' or darar ghaibi. Even the word ghaibi is very difficult to define. You remember in tafsir, you say ghaibi. I think Muhammad Asad got to try it. Beyond human perception. That's what's beyond human perception. Al-ghaib. Which is not accessible to you directly by your senses or indirectly. Completely inaccessible. Like atomic situation, that's accessible either by direct observation or from observation by mathematical calculation. That's still accessible. That's not ghaibi. So you see, even ghaibi is very difficult to define. It's more relative to humans. What's ghaib to humans, maybe not ghaib to jinn or to angels, for example. What's completely absolute ghaib is only known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are things like that also. So you see, it's completely wavering. It doesn't bring you satisfaction. It doesn't bring you clarity, really philosophical or logical clarity. Our approach is the correct one. There are two concepts. Either they are independent, uluhiyya and ibadah, or they are independent, but one is primary, other secondary, or both of them primary and secondary, that's circularity. And we discussed all of them and showed that the Quran dictate that it must be uluhiyya is primary and ibadah is secondary. Remains that what to define it. And we missed in that version, in this, we missed benefiting from the Arabic language that Allah ta'budu illa Allah, etc. Don't enslave yourself, which contains submission and absolute obedience. Absolute submission, absolute obedience. خلاص, that's it, the matter completely. Yeah.
Moreover, an act may be considered worship of other than Allah, exalted is He, yet its performer may be excused, in which case he is not deemed a mushrik, as will be explained if Allah wills. This is a concise and well-phrased formulation, as noted by the Mustahiq verifier, whom I believe to be Sheikh Bakr Abu Zaid, may Allah have mercy on him, in his introduction to Athar al-Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Mu'allami. Okay, so continuing with his work, the refined articulation of the definition of worship is as follows: voluntary submission through which an unseen benefit is sought. That is to say, it is of such a nature that the one submitting actively seeks an unseen benefit, believing or assuming that his submission serves as a means to attaining it. The one submitting is considered akin to a seeker, such that the given act is customarily associated with the pursuit of unseen benefit. An example of this is prostration before an idol. If performed out of defiance, as was the case with Pharaoh and his people, out of fear of harm that does not reach the level of coercion, out of flattery, out of desire for worldly gain, such as one who is offered great wealth in exchange for prostrating before an idol, or out of jest and amusement. This definition applies to worship in its general sense. However, if one intends to define worship directed to Allah, then the phrase "bi sultan" with authority is added. And if one intends to define worship to other than him, then the phrase "bi ghayr sultan" without authority is appended. So the Arabic, this is a footnote. The Arabic edition doesn't clearly define where this quote is taken from. Okay, that's just a note. Okay, now this is continuing. The explanation of an unseen benefit appears in Athar al-Mu'allimi, where it is stated, by an unseen benefit, what is meant by an unseen benefit, what is meant is that which occurs contrary to the natural order, which is established through sensory perception and direct observation. Thus, let us begin with the third clause of the definition of ilah, where it is stated, as for the meaning of, this is from the book, as for the meaning of ilah in the testimony of faith, it signifies the one deserving of worship. If you wish, you may say that which pure intellect independently perceives as being worthy of submission in pursuit of an unseen benefit. Thus,
let me just, I cannot stop myself from laughing. Even that when you say the prostrating for an idol is requesting or seeking for unseen benefits or غيبي, منفعة غيبية, or preventing harm is also a benefit. Preventing harm is also a benefit. So let's use the word benefit. Obviously, the one who was sitting in front of idol, seeking that, he's doing it because believes the idol or whatever entity behind the idol is capable of delivering this ghaibiyah. So it has certain attributes and capability. So he must believe that the idol is just something more than the stone. What is it? An entity which can provide this manfa. So fundamentally is the belief in the entity. But the belief may be wrong and right, but thus he believes that this entity can provide this nafa ghaibi. And he went to an extreme, saying manfa ghaibi is beyond the natural order and so on. Okay, he wants to make ghaibi very clear. That's not like asking someone, hand me a hammer, or if you are drowning in the water and someone is at the side of the river, screaming to him, throw me the rope so you can hang on it, or something like that. That's not ghaibi, that's present. And this guy can throw the rope. So that's not having to do worship and ibadah. He want to exclude that, rightly, he want to exclude it. But the ones prostrating for an idol, seeking, for example, heal my son, he believes that he can heal it by extraordinary power. He's not a medical doctor, so give him the injection. Yeah, so he's trying to do that, but still, you see, hidden نفع غيبي. What the meaning of نفع غيبي? You believe that this entity will give you the نفع غيبي, the benefit, the unseen benefit, or the supernatural benefit. So the being is capable of doing that. Otherwise, you will not prostrate and accept for him. So finish. The belief is first. The belief is first. That's it. So you believe in certain attributes in the entity, not the mere prostration, nor the seeking for that. But what you are seeking, meaning that the entity you are seeking that from it, you believe it will be able to provide that. Otherwise, you will not do it. Otherwise, this guy should be locked in the mental institution. So you see, again, even in this way, you are not getting away. It's no way. It's not, even by perception and necessity of reason and perception. You don't need even to go to the Quran to see that Allah is independently divine in the ayah of mutual obstruction or mutual prevention. You don't need even to invoke the ayah. Just from that definition, it's clear that it will fail. Making ibadah independent from the belief in the entity you're addressing to get the benefit, the ghaibi benefit. It's clear? You will not prostrate to an idol, requesting Allah, saying, please heal my son. Unless you believe the idol or whatever, the divine entity behind the idol, whatever you think about the idol, is capable of doing that benefit. So we are attributing to it certain properties. Based on that, you do the action. So again, ibadah is secondary, and the belief and the description of the entity is the primary. So uluhiyyah before ibadah. Also, even in this long-winded ultimate is like that. Yeah, carry on.
Thus, Allah, exalted and blessed, is deserving of worship, and pure intellect independently precedes his right to be submitted to in pursuit of an unseen benefit. So in light of the above, we would argue that it is necessary here to replace the phrase mustahiq lil ibadah, deserving of worship, with our refined formulation, namely the entity or being characterized by or possessing the power to that by which worship is deserved. This is precisely our definition of ilah, translated for those who insist upon that reprehensible approach, which is the forced insertion of the term al-ibadah, worship, into the definition. So is this your definition then?
Yeah, yes, we can refine it this way, and then his theory will fly away. Again, ilah will be a definition of uluhiyyah is the primary.
We have already critiqued this at length, yet for the sake of leniency, avoiding needless disputation and the accusation of excessive rigidity, we shall exercise even greater leniency for the sake of brevity and to avoid convoluted and cumbersome phrasing. Thus we shall say, deserving of worship, or alternately, the rightfully worshipped. However, we must firmly uphold the meaning contained within the expanded formulation. The entity characterized by possessing the power to that by which worship is deserved, the necessity of this replacement becomes evident when we recognize that Allah, majestic and exalted, is an ilah eternally. He is the ilah of all people of sensory perception. He is of all people and indeed of all created beings with absolute certainty by A, the necessity of sensory perception, B, the necessity of reason, C, the explicit text of the Quran, and D, the consensus of rational human beings, even those among them who may be insane. Even the atheists who deny the existence of Allah do not dispute the meaning of ilah. Rather, they only deny the existence of an ilah. The testimony of faith affirms that Allah is ilah and expressly negates the existence of any ilah besides him.
Yeah.
Thus, if we were to define ilah as al-ma'bud bihaq, the rightfully worship, or even mustahiq lil ibadah, the one deserving of worship, it would lead to falsehoods and heinous blasphemies, which we have already disproved in previous chapters. Rather, the Islamic testimony of faith must be articulated as below, as follows: La ilaha illallah equals there exists no ilah except for one, and he is Allah, which equals there exists absolutely nothing that is characterized by or possesses the power to that by which worship is deserved except for one, and he is Allah. Thus, we have before us this category of ilah of the highest degree. Those who are rightfully worshipped employing leniency in phrasing, yet in truth, on the basis of definitive proofs, these entities are either A, totally non-existent, having no existence whatsoever beyond the distorted imaginations of the mushrikeen, or B, beings that do or once did exist, but not possessing the attributes that the mushrikeen claim for them. That is, except for one, Allah, the Almighty, exalted. At this juncture, we do not need concern with the we need not concern with the detailed definition of worship. Rather, it suffices that worship has been correctly defined in some valid manner. Now, let us return to the definition of ilah as previously cited in the text.
It's the primary here.
Upon examination, we find that the second clause previously quoted, which states, number 2, whoever claims that something is mustahiq lil ibadah, worthy, deserving of worship, has worshipped it by way of this claim, as it entails a form of submission that inherently seeks a hidden benefit. By doing this, they have made it an ilah. Similarly, whoever affirms for
That's al-Muallimi. That's again blabbering. He tried to get worship somehow in the fundamental definition. But if you believe something is worthy of worship beside Allah, another entity, then you violated Kitab At Tawheed, and then then you are asserting that it may be worship then, because it's worthy worship. It may be worship, whatever worship meaning, prostration, etc. But the fundamental thing is that you believe it has these worthiness, this attributes, and that's what makes it shirk. You don't need to submission and so on. So worthy worship meaning he is having attributes that whatever worship entail can be offered to him. So don't need to say entails submission and so on. Submission will be based on that, possibly, but the mere abstract acceptance make you mushrik. Make you mushrik. Even if you say, I'm not going to submit to him, I'm going to rebel, still you are mushrik, because you attributed this aspect to someone else. So that's the problem when they start somehow, they got stuck in ibadah, there's something independent. It can be defined independently. Then you get in the devil's kitchen. There's no way you get out. We discussed, I think, at length with the equation and so on. There's no way. But here, because he came to this convoluted seeking manfa'a ghaibiyya, unseen benefit or supernatural benefit, he thought he solved the problem. But he didn't solve even that. Seeking supernatural benefit for someone means, unless you are mental in the mental institution, I'm not discussing with mental people, but with rational human beings, means you believe that he is capable of delivering that. Otherwise, you will not seek it from him. So you believe that he has certain divine attributes. Khalas, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Game over. And that's what the shirk what we are trying to find. Seeking or not seeking, that's the secondary. That's the point. Clear? So the twisted thing and going back and forth, we're not going to help, because he's still in the circularity internally. You say it's internal. You cannot get out. You cannot get out.
Similarly, whoever affirms for something an independent authority in creation, provision, or similar acts has linked this authority to the basis of deserving worship, as has been previously established. Likewise, whoever affirms that something can intercede without permission and that its intercession is never rejected has ascribed to it a form of independent authority in a manner akin to independent governance.
Yeah.
So this is continuing. To this, I would argue that this is of utmost importance, for it establishes that merely ascribing the right to be worshipped to something, or affirming that something possesses independent governance over creation, sustenance, and similar matters, or affirming that something intercedes without permission and that its intercession is never rejected, it renders this very attribution an act of worship toward that entity. This is precisely our position, or to phrase it more accurately, it is part of our position, and it is this truth irrespective of how worship is defined in detail. However, Al-Muallimi has fallen into circular reason without realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. That's because the moment you attribute that to that entity, you could say that's the first stage or the first station of worship. You attribute that to that entity wrongly, or you believe that entity has these features, this and this and this and this, that would make it ilah. So you believe it is an ilah, you are a mushrik. You may offer certain acts or not. That will be then still it will not get you out of shirk. Still, and the acts, if offered, they are then worship for him. Yeah.
However, Al-Muallimi has fallen into circular reasoning without realizing it. He states, whoever claims that something is worthy, deserving of worship, has worshipped it by way of this claim. For in reality, merely attributing the right to be worshipped to something is itself worship of that entity. This is precisely what the Wahhabis refer to as doctrinal worship, as Al-Muallimi himself explicitly stated. Thus, what was required was for him to state, whoever claims that something is worthy, deserving of worship, has worshipped it by way of this claim, as it entails a form of submission that inherently seeks a hidden benefit. This would be the lenient phrasing. Alternatively, in more stringent, he should have stated, whoever claims that something is an ilah, meaning that it is characterized by or possesses the power to that by which voluntary submission, through which unseen benefit is sought, is deemed due, by necessity submitted to it, even if it is not an actual deed. Thus he is its worshipper, meaning that he has worshipped it. So in other words, what you're saying here is that just by considering it to be independent, you've conferred the divine attribute. So then
it's divine. Then whatever is done after that is irrelevant. It's secondary.
It's icing on the cake, basically.
Yeah, that's you offer it, you don't offer it. That's not relevant. That's a fundamental thing.
The shirk has been done.
It's done, and then that's what we want to say. يعبد غير الله, meaning do things. Do the things which he's seeking. For example, منفعة غيبية. Yeah, fine, but he couldn't possibly seeking منفعة غيبية from that entity unless he believes that entity has certain attributes and capabilities. That's it. So the fundamental point is that that entity has certain independent of anyone asking or not asking. It did not have this capability because of your asking. It has it intrinsically. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So Elohiyya is first, the primary thing.
This is instead of the contradictory statement as mentioned earlier, point 2. For the phrase, and by this he has rendered it an ilah, is meaningless, as he had already claimed that it was an ilah of this particular category.
Yeah, that's it. You see, that's the circularity. That's the circularity. That's the circularity. Sometimes people are deceived by some, like with the hadith of the father Umar bin Hussein, in the President Allah saying, "Kam ilahan ta'bud." So it looks like ilah wa ta'bud seems to be independent. No, how many deity which you also offer complete submission, and there's a meaning. Not tribal chieftain, because some people may confuse the word ilah could be a leader or something like that. That's what I'm asking you, Amr. I'm not asking you about who is the lord of the tribe or the master of the tribe and so on. But you see, he asked, where's the word ilah? There's the Rab, because the Rab could be the leader of the tribe. They may use the title Rab for them in Jahiliyyah. They were using for the king. They call him the Rab. ارجع لربك فاسأله ما بال النسوة, for example, before Islam. And in other religions, that was not prohibited to use the Rabb for a king and for the master or a slave and things like that. Islam made it undesirable or haram to use the Rabb except for Allah. But this is the more clean etiquette. But he starts about ilah. He didn't say what kam Rabban ta'bud, kam ilah. So people think that ilah is independent from ya'bud ta'bud. No, it is ilah, but he's clarifying it further. I mean those things which you offer, ask for matlab ghaibi, believing they are capable of doing it. But to abbreviate it, make it a symbol for a simple Bedouin, like the father of Hussein, Imran bin Hussein, so Hussein himself, is to come ilah ta'bud. And Imran understood. He doesn't need a long-winded expression like the Mu'allimi did. And he said 7, 1 in heaven and 6 in earth. The one in heaven is by the tradition or by the human perception normally is Allah, the supreme God. And the one on earth most likely is a satanic entity. So if you leave the one on earth and you accept only the one in heaven, then I will teach you something good. We mentioned that hadith earlier. So when he said, "Kam ilahan ta'bud," does not mean that ibadah is the for ilah, but it's just a clarification or shortening a very long sentence. Yeah, so there would be no confusion.
Thus he then proceeded to act upon this alleged ilah, and according to Al-Muallimi's assertion, it was by this act that he made it an ilah. This necessarily implies that it was not an ilah before this final act of making it so.
Yeah.
The result then is a contradiction, and that the entity wasn't
So
an
it must be an
ilah.
ilah before have these certain attributes in the mind of obviously the one who approaches him. He may not exist, but what counts is the belief in that entity. So he had these things, and therefore you ask or seek manfa ghaibi, supernatural or hidden benefit. What he called ghaibi. How he translated ghaibi, hidden benefit, or what was the word he using, Muallimi?
1 second.
What the word using for ghaibi? Absent, beyond perception, supernatural, whatever. He used a certain word we translated. I forgot it just a few minutes ago. We went through it several times.
Unseen benefit.
Unseen benefit, unseen. It's actually absent, not unseen. But anyway, that's a ghaib, ghaba. He was absent. Anyway, absent and unseen. Because it could be here, but absent, completely absent. From here, it's linguistic.
Absent also gives them impression that it's intangible, doesn't exist.
Yeah,
so it's not there. So unseen may be better because it's something that's not perceivable, but it's there.
But
imperceptive or imperceptible or something would be probably a better word.
Imperceptible, yeah, that's ghaib. That's ghaib. Yeah. It is absent. It is not within reach of your eyes or ears or touch or anything. Is far away. Is behind the horizon of all senses. Yeah, that's ghaib. Absent from Arabic is ghaib. I think ghaib is more accurate, but it has to be a little bit fleshed out. But anyway, so initially seeking a benefit from such an entity, ghaibi, meaning that entity is capable of providing this benefit. This benefit is being in ghaib, so this entity is also in ghaib. Okay, fine. It has these attributes. It's a supernatural or absent or beyond perception entity which is capable of certain things. So that's the definition of ilah. And then we say the asking and seeking and so on, make him an ilah. But he's ilah before that, so come into contradiction. He's ilah before you make him an ilah, and then you make him an ilah, which is not clearly nonsensical. It's circularity and vicious circularity, not just a conjoint circularity. Yeah.
Okay, continuing. This necessarily implies that it was not an ilah before this final act of making it so. The result then is a contradiction, that the entity was an ilah and was not an ilah at the same time and from the same perspective. What appears to me is that this is merely a formal circularity arising from faulty sentence construction. The correct approach would have been to construct two independent statements, which can be formulated as follows. Number one, whoever claims that something is deserving of worship has by that very claim worshipped it. Thus he has rendered it an ilah, for an ilah is that which is deserving of worship. Number two, ascribing the right to be worshipped to something inherently entails in and as of itself a form of submission through which an unseen benefit is sought. Thus the attribution itself is an act of worship of the entity to whom it is ascribed. There is no doubt that ascribing divinity to anything constitutes worship of that entity, necessarily and inevitably. Otherwise, mere ascription of divinity to anything other than Allah would not have been deemed shirk and kufr, as is necessitated by the dictates of reason, the explicit text of the Quran, the definitive consensus of the people of Islam, a fact acknowledged by Muallimi himself. Thus, the principle that merely ascribing divinity to other than Allah is shirk and kufr is a necessary condition for the correctness of the definition of al-ibadah, worship. According to our definition, there is no issue, for in our formulation, we hold that the following is established, namely, worship of other than Allah equals ascribing divinity to anything other than Allah, which equals shirk with Allah. However, in Al-Muallimi's definition, he defines worship otherwise, as mentioned previously. Yet his definition is not inherently clear. For this reason, he found himself, may Allah pardon him, compelled to argue, whoever Also, whoever claims that something is mustahiq lil ibadah, worthy, deserving of worship, has worshipped it by way of this claim, etc. This is highly problematic, for mere ascription does not necessarily imply submission, at least as it appears to me at first glance. Likewise, mere affirmation does not necessarily entail submission, as is evident from the case of Iblis and the people of Pharaoh. Rather, submission only follows after testifying to divinity of something, because such a testimony inherently entails acknowledgement, acceptance, and submission. Therefore, al-Muallimi's definition of worship suffers from a major for it fails to satisfy the necessary condition mentioned above. His definition does not apply in its given form to the highest degree of ilah. Thus, it is an incomplete definition and is therefore invalid. Looked at from another perspective, Dr. Hatim al-Aouni, may Allah preserve him, raised a significant objection to al-Muallimi's definition of worship on his official platform on Facebook. Therein, he mentioned the following. If a man submits to a created being, seeking to save his son from the hands of thieves who stand before him and seize his son, this is not an unseen matter. However, if he submits to the created being, believing that it exercises control over the universe independently of Allah's permission, in the manner of the Lord, the owner, and the disposer of affairs, then according to Al-Muallimi's definition, he would not be considered a mushrik because he did not seek an unseen benefit. Yeah, that's pretty. In response to the above, I would argue that Al-Muallimi has already judged this assertion that such a person has worshipped the one to whom he submitted. Moreover, he has rendered him an ilah other than Allah. This ruling is based solely on the attribution of independent control over the universe to that being without Allah's permission. Thus, the one submitting is a mushrik kafir without exception. However, this is not the core issue. Rather, the matter at hand is the validity or invalidity of Al-Muallimi's definition of worship, and the invalidity of this definition, particularly with respect to ilahs of the highest degree, is as evident as the sun at midday. This is due to the absence of an unseen benefit. Whatever the case may be, there is fundamentally no necessity to establish a precise definition of worship, at least in relation to ilahs of the highest degree, except for the essential inclusion within the definition of worship of the mere ascription of the right to be worshipped to something. This would ensure that the mere attribution itself constitutes worship of the one to whom it is ascribed, and that it amounts to shirk and kufr, if it is ascribed to any entity other than Allah. There is another significant issue with the wording which Al-Muallimi uses in relation to the latter half of point 2 quoted above. So that's from Muallimi, where he writes, similarly, whoever affirms for something an independent authority in creation, provision, or similar acts has linked this authority to the basis of deserving worship, as has been previously established, etc. This statement fails to mention the most dangerous type of ilahs among the Quraysh and other nations, namely beings which were ascribed and attributed to godly or divine lineage, and secondly, beings that were claimed to belong to a divine species or genus. Thus, it would have been more appropriate for him not to limit the first sentence exclusively to governance over creation and sustenance. Rather, he should have stated, similarly, whoever affirms something performs an action by its own intrinsic power independently, particularly in relation to acts of creation, provision, exaltation, subjugation, perception, and other such attributes. Furthermore, his formulation should have incorporated additional critical examples of instances where shirk has occurred. For example, whoever affirmed that something can grant asylum from Allah, protecting someone from his punishment, whoever were to affirm that something can conceal itself from Allah, can escape his grasp, or evade him by flight, and whoever were to affirm that something possesses absolute sovereignty, such that it legislates and governs without any authority above it, necessitating absolute obedience. Returning to Al-Muallimi's first clause listed as one above, with regards to Al-Ilah, God, deity, it is Al-Ma'bud, one that is worshipped. Whomsoever worships something has taken it as an Ilah. This is highly problematic. According to our definition of Ilah and Ibadah, this type, of which we shall call it Ilahs of second degree, is entirely impossible. His statement, even if he does not claim that it is deserving of worship, does not hold, and the proper wording should be, even if he claims that it is not deserving of worship. For any given entity, it must either be A, not deserving of worship, or B, deserving of worship. These are two mutually exclusive, contradictory states, and there is no intermediary between them. Those deserving of worship are what we previously classified as ilahs of the highest degree. This category has already been discussed, and it is entirely distinct. In fact, it's the direct opposite of the second degree ilahs. I think this would also be resolved by your use, you're appropriating the term ibadah as being enslavement, because you wouldn't enslave yourself
definitely, but because Al-Muallim did it this twisted way, we are going along his twist and see how we can improve on it. But we have done it earlier when we said, you remember we had a section or a chapter in which we said these two different concepts are there, who is primary, who is secondary, or they are equally primary and secondary. That's a circularity. That's the Mu'allimi essentially approach in part, and then in part he make ibadah primary. So he's wavering between the two and mixing them. And the third one, they are completely independent, which contradicts Quran and reason. It contradicts the Quran and Sunnah and reason. Yeah. And we discussed all the four. You remember in the previous section or 2 sections ago, or let's say 2 chapters ago. So that settled the matter, but because Mu'allimi wrote it and his language is a bit twisted, is problematic. And the main definition is that seeking unseen benefit. Seeking benefit is ibadah. But you will not seek unseen any rational being. Non-rational is not relevant. Any rational being will not seek unseen benefit except from an entity which can provide this unseen benefit. That entity must be itself unseen and beyond the unseen, or something that's supernatural. So he believes that this entity has these characteristics, being supernatural, capable of providing the unseen benefit. That's it. That's the primary thing. That's it. It's ilah. It's having a description of uluhiyyah. And then seeking or not seeking is secondary. That's it. But we want to expand. So because some people will read that and think he solved the problem. Then again, he said controlling the universe and so on, try to get another title. And in both the part definition, the third one, that someone of the divine genus and so on, divine substance, is completely ignored and neglected. So it is deficient. Well, our definition that ilah is either something which can create out of his own power, or something descending from that ilah from the same substance, which is obviously absurd, but as people some believe that, like in the Trinity. So we have the primary one, and the one maybe genealogically or whatever I call it could descend from a divine entity. And this one does not have independent power. He's completely, he's essentially his father's powers, his father love, his, like in the case of Isa. No contradiction with the father, there will be no tamanu. Both of these types are, the second type especially, all the definition will not catch that. That's the reason all the Wahhabi is never mentioning that the angel is the daughter of Allah or something like that. They're just simply completely lost because of that. They're unable to get it. Because they do not take al-tamanu on board. If you don't take al-tamanu on board, you will never end anywhere. And other ayahs, but the al-tamanu is very clear. ما اتخذ الله من ولد وكان معه الإله إذا لذهب كل إله بما خلق. That's it. And these are two types of divine being. Either the one independently with independent power of creation, and he can take his creation and move away, or he defeat the others or overcome them, or a second category, an entity descending from such an ilah, from such an infinitely powerful entity. These are two. That's the definition of uluhiyyah. Or attributing anything of that, or any aspect of that, or any aspect which entails that, like for example, the jinn, they can run away from Allah, meaning he has not the power to control them. So he can be overcome them, at least in this limited aspect of running away. So that's attributing that, make him equal to Allah, and this is making them ilah in a reduced way, but they still have attribute to ilah. And then whatever you offer to them, fear, request, etc., all is not relevant. It doesn't increase. It may increase the shirk. In addition to the shirk and ibadah in matter of belief, you're adding in matter of action also, like slaughtering a cow for the jinn, whom you believe they cannot run away from Allah. But you do not slaughter a cow except to appease them because they have these attributes. Finish. Game over. That's just if they just flesh things clearly, but they are trying to run away from Aqidah, because that's what their opponents from either they say, you are mistaken. Those going around the grave and circumambulating, they don't believe that the one who is dead has any capabilities independent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this would refute all the called shirk al-qubur and shirk al-amwat. Is there not? Doesn't exist. It's nonsense. So they are struggling to keep that. There's no way they can. It will lead in every direction into a contradiction. And I think we have refuted that before. But because Muallimi is such a major authority in their eyes, and he is relatively modern, and he summarized all what the Wahhabis and the Shawkani did before him in a concise place, he seems to be like an authority in that area. But we show even this, after the long struggle of hundreds of pages, he ends with the definition which are internally contradictory or going back on the initial definition, as we discussed. Okay, carry on. Mm-hmm.
Okay, continuing. So there is a logical impossibility of worship being detached completely from a priori belief. Even with the revised wording, the statement remains problematic. A rational person may well say, I smiled at him despite knowing he does not deserve my warmth. I did so out of diplomacy and courtesy. Or I punished him despite knowing that he was not proven guilty. Nor did he deserve punishment, but I did so to deter the wicked and preserve state authority. Such statements are conceivable. However, for a rational person, especially a Muslim, to say, I worshipped it, despite knowing that it is not deserving of worship, is utterly implausible. For the matter of worship, al-ibadah, is of the utmost gravity to anyone who believes in the hereafter, the reward of punishment of paradise and the punishment of hell. This is a matter of life and death. Thus, the situation must fall into one of two scenarios only. The first, the person actually worshipped it. If so, then he must be lying when he claims to believe that it is not deserving of worship. Secondly, the person truly believes it is not deserving of worship. In this case, he must be denying that his action constitutes worship of that entity.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no way that you can say worship, but I know he's not worthy of worship. I'm worshiping him, although I know he's not worthy of worship. That's nonsensical. That's nonsensical. Either you believe he's worthy of worship, he has certain attributes and so on, and then what you do is worship, or he doesn't have these attributes, what you do is not worship. It's his other act. It's other act. It's respect, honor, whatever it is. It can't be otherwise.
Therefore, we can conclude that the definition which Al-Muallimi formulated is fundamentally flawed. For either the person is lying about his belief or he does not consider his action to be worship. In both cases, the logic of the definition collapses. One will notice that there is an inherent contradiction and a form of circular reason, whether subtle or explicit. This cannot be resolved except by recognizing that the insertion of the phrase deserving of worship is the root of the core of the issue. Mm-hmm. Thus, what was necessary for Al-Muallimi, if he were to insist on defining it as at all, was to state, as for the ilah, it is simply the one that is worshipped. Whoever worships something has taken it as an ilah, regardless of his beliefs concerning it. And worship is defined as voluntary submission through which an unseen benefit is sought. There is no need for such examples, such as, for instance, one who seeks worldly benefit and the like. For such illustrations introduce more confusion than clarity. Additionally, it is necessary to append that this applies only to ilahs of the category where none are believed to be the entity categorized by, or the one possessing the power to that by which worship is deemed overdue. This is necessary to avoid contradiction, which would otherwise invalidate the second and third clauses of his definition of worship, as previously explained. With this refinement, we may have escaped the circular reasoning that was previously identified. However, have we truly arrived at a coherent and beneficial definition?
Definition? No.
Consider first this striking example. That is from the book. The correct position is that the general statement of the scholars of the madhab is that prostration to one's parents and similar do not constitute apostasy, should be understood only in cases where the person prostrates without holding a religious conviction regarding the prostration and without claiming that it brings an unseen benefit. Rather, he prostrates due to a natural or customary inclination or for a practical purpose, such as the one who prostrates to a ruler to be granted leadership or to receive financial compensation. In such a case, this bears no resemblance to the prostration of the mushrikeen to their deities, as is evidence. As for the one who prostrates to his parents as a religious act seeking an unseen benefit, then this is precisely the act of the mushrikeen. Immediately, for those in real commentary, immediately following this comment, the commentator of Athar al-Muallimi provides the following footnote on the same page as the text. Previously, in the definition of worship on pages 733 to 734, it was established that seeking an unseen benefit is not a condition for prostration to an idol. Rather, even if one prostrates out of defiance or out of worldly incentive, such as the one who is offered a great sum of wealth to prostrate to an idol, or if he does so mockingly, all of these constitute apostasy, and jurists affirm apostasy based on his very words. It appears that the author is not concerned with the mere act of prostration, but rather with the object of prostration. Thus, he distinguishes between an idol whose worshippers generally seek an unseen benefit and a human ruler for whom prostration is not commonly associated with seeking an unseen benefit. Thus, he conditions takfir in the case of a human ruler upon the seeker. However, he did not impose such a condition for the prostration of an idol. So this is you. In response to the above, I would argue the following. Do you see the contradiction and ambiguity which indicate the invalidity of this definition within this brief text? Firstly, there is a contradiction in the requirement of an unseen benefit. At times, seeking an unseen benefit is presented as a necessary condition, while at other times it is not required. Both the commentator, may Allah have mercy on him, and Dr. Hatim al-Awni have noticed this discrepancy. Both are correct in that. Secondly comes the undefined concept of non-religious prostration. What does it even mean to prostrate without religious conviction towards one's parents? There are some critical issues here. What is religiosity in this particular context?
Yeah, so he's using terms which are not well defined. And there's a definition of something important like ibadah should have has components which are similar. Even the definition that seeking nafa' ghaibi, unseen benefit. Yeah, unseen is very complex, more complex than ibadah. It's not a simple concept. Yeah. So you don't define basic concept like ibadah or abudullah la yakum ilahin ghayruh. Simple, everyone perceive it right away what you mean. Enslave yourself to Allah with a concept which is complicated, need a long-winded explanation. That's bad definition. Maybe it's valid sometimes, but this is not a good definition. So it's not a good definition in the formulation. Explaining the symbol with a complicated, that does not make good sense. It's not good definition technology and the phrasing. But it's a matter of beauty, obviously. And secondly, it is containing this contradiction because in the matter of seeking benefit, but he contradicts himself. Instead, in situation, he doesn't need someone doesn't need to seek benefit. So that's not a comprehensive definition of that. We discussed all of that. It's just a nightmare. But I'm trying to go bit by bit so to show how making ilah wal ma'bud or worthy of worship will lead you into a nightmare. And ilah is the one who does this and this and cannot do this, and that's it. Independent of this, someone worshipping him or what's the definition of worship, then worship has to define based on that. Okay.
What is religiosity in this particular context? If religiosity means worship, then inevitably this leads to circularity of reasoning or to infinite regress. If religiosity doesn't mean worship, What is it exactly referring to then?
Yeah.
Thirdly, there is a matter regarding the unrelated essential attributes of the worshipped. The definition provided by Al-Muallimi doesn't include any mention of the essential attributes of the entity worship. Why then does the object of prostration suddenly appear from the back door unexpectedly? Fourth, there is no notable absence of a concrete example regarding the scenario. Whoever prostrates to his parents as a religious act seeking an unseen benefit. I have failed to identify for any example of what an unseen benefit could be sought here that would render such an act shirk. Moreover, Muallimi has provided no example either. Following on from this, additional points must be made. To begin, it does not appear that defining worship as voluntary submission through which an unseen benefit is sought satisfies the necessary condition mentioned above, namely, the mere ascription of divinity to anything other than Allah constitutes shirk and kufr. The use of the passive construction in the phrasing through which an unseen benefit is sought renders the definition ambiguous. Who exactly is seeking this unseen benefit? Is it sought from the one to whom submission is directed, or is it sought from Allah, or from some third entity? What is naturally established in human disposition when speaking of worship, religion, and religiosity and deities is as follows. The one worshipped is the one to whom submission is directed. B. The benefit is sought from the one to whom submission is directed. Next, concerning the addition mentioned, if the definition of worship of Allah is intended, then the phrase with authority should be added. Or if the definition of worship of Allah, of other than Allah, is intended, then the phrase without authority should be added. This is highly problematic, for what is firmly established in human nature is that the one worshipped is the one to whom submission is directed. If this is acknowledged, then the phrase with authority does not apply to worshipping of Allah except to distinguish legitimate worship from innovated worship and nothing more. Otherwise, all worship of Allah is the worship of Allah. However, if the discussion concerned worship directed to other than Allah, then human nature vehemently rejects the notion that such worship could ever be with authority. As we have elaborated when discussing the meaning of Allah's statement, and that you associate with Allah that for which He has not sent down any authority. This is, and that's Quran 4:140. This is discussed in a separate dedicated chapter. It appears that Al-Muallimi is entangled in the implication that Allah could send down authority for shirk. We seek refuge in Allah from such a claim. The definition of unseen benefit lacks precision, for what is unseen to Zayd may be witnessed by Amr. However, Al-Muallimi seeks to include within this definition al-istighatha bil-amwat, the supplication or calling upon the dead. Yet he did not succeed in this effort, as will be demonstrated in our detailed analysis in the next volume, which covers the essence of veneration and ritual acts of worship. Rather, true unseen benefit is that which a being accomplishes by its own intrinsic power independently. This is what truly violates the system of nature, whether in the physical world, the afterlife, the nature of angels, and the reality of heaven and hell. This is unseen for every being within the realm of nature, and no one can accomplish such an act except the one who fashioned nature, the one who is necessarily beyond nature. Thus, the matter ultimately returns to one's belief concerning the being to whom submission is directed. Furthermore, Hatim al-Awni, may Allah preserve him, raised another objection regarding Al-Muallimi's definition of worship on his online platform, Facebook. He stated, according to this definition, if a man were to prostrate to Christ and prostration to beings other than Allah was permissible among the children of Israel, and he submitted to him in the same manner as a believer in Allah would submit before the Spirit of Allah and His Word and the Messenger, seeking that Christ would revive his son, inform him of his past provisions, or heal him from blindness or leprosy that humans are capable of incurring. If he were to kiss Christ's hands and supplicate him humbly to do such acts, then according to this he has worshipped Christ and committed shirk. Yet this man has merely believed in what Christ himself informed them. He will send him as a child to the children of Israel, as a messenger to the children of Israel. I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. I will make the shape of a bird for you out of clay, then breathe into it, and with Allah's permission, it will become a real bird. I will heal the blind and the leper and bring the dead back to life with Allah's permission. I will tell you what you may eat and what you may store up in your houses.
Yeah.
There truly is a sign for you in this if you are believers. And that's Surah Al Imran 49. This demonstrates that not every voluntary submission seeking an unseen matter constitutes shirk. Ustad Mahir Amir raised an objection to this, saying, Shaykh Khatim, may Allah preserve you, if you had restricted your statement with the condition he himself mentioned, namely with authority or without authority, that apparent inconsistency would be removed. The submission in both cases is worship of Allah because it is with authority, and that establishes the submission as a cause for unseen benefit. Moreover, the submission to them is also governed by authority. Otherwise, it would be an excess without authority and thus shirk. Al-Muallimi has responded to a similar issue that resembles your point so as not to assume this misunderstanding. His definition does not differ substantially from others in meaning but is more precise. Submission or humility is linguistically worship, and its regulation lies in seeking unseen benefit, which is inherently exclusive to Allah. What do you think? May Allah preserve you. In reply, Hatim al-Awni said, he did not worship it, he did not condition it with the restriction you mentioned, and his definition of worship is entirely devoid of this restriction. The restriction you mentioned is not for defining, but for defining the worship that is specific to Allah. Responding in turn, Ustad Mahir Amir wrote, yes, you're right, but that is a subject of inquiry, namely al-ibadah al-mahmudah, legitimate worship, and its opposite, ضدها الشرقية, idolatrous worship. The question, as I understood it, is when does submission seeking unseen benefit constitute shirk, and when is it for Allah? Thus, this restriction could remove the perceived inconsistency. There is no doubt that you have reviewed what he responded to in your inquiry on page 736. Do you have any particular insight that led you to not to accept it, thereby justify mentioning the objection as a flaw, even though he explained how it constitutes submission to Allah with no inconsistency or shirk? Now, this is you continuing. With this, as far as I know, the discussion concluded and Allah knows best. Thus, I say as follows. What must be decisively affirmed is the following. Firstly, this man submitted to Christ with absolute certainty, seeking unseen benefit. Here, the agent of benefit is Christ himself, peace be upon him. Secondly, submission and humility constitute worship linguistically, meaning that the one submitted to is necessarily the one worshipped in this instance linguistically. Even if we accept Al-Muallimi's conditions, we cannot negate the objective sensory reality, which is the man submitted to Christ. The man worshipped Christ according to Al-Muallimi's definition. At most, what Al-Muallimi's condition can offer us is that this worship of Christ was with authority. Thus, it remains at the same time worship of Allah. However, the fact that it is worship of Allah does not negate that it is also worship of Christ, unless, of course, one is willing to indulge in linguistic manipulation, thereby collapsing into the abyss of Karmatian doctrines, or into sophistry in rational matters. Thus, the conclusion of this would be worship of Allah plus worship of Christ equals partnership by necessity of sense and reason, which equals shirk. And I hasten to add that this is a permissible shirk, indeed a praiseworthy shirk, then both of acts of worship are praiseworthy. If this is acceptable to Al-Muallimi and Ustad Mahir Al-Amir, then all praise is due to Allah. As for us, we say this is an invalid definition of worship.
That's it. From the beginning, it's invalid. This is nonsensical. It's
basically, you've just through this example, you found a flaw in his reasoning, because that act, it's just basically
it fits the definition, but it is with authority and with not with authority. It's a nightmare. The solution of that is that if he submitted to Christ, asking that, believing that is within Christ's power, independent of Allah, that will be shirk and worship. Otherwise, it is just submission and kissing his hand and give him the due respect. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bye-bye. انتهى الموضوع. That's it.
In the same way, then, when
The whole issue is what is he is in the power of Christ, independent of Allah or not. That's it. Finish. So it has to be seeking benefit. That's one type of worship. There are other type of worship, but there's one type, the main one, which is seeking ghaibi benefit, unseen benefit. Entails necessity. It is for the one whom you are seeking that, so it must be in your mind must be capable of providing that ghaibi benefit on his own power. If that's not the case, that means he's a deity. That's it. So the whole act is directed to a deity, and deity has been defined before of capable of doing this and this and this. Finished. That's the starting point. Define divinity first, and then worship will follow. With the fine details about the sultan, without sultan, these are secondary things which have no importance. So the fundamental question is the same. Is Ilah defined first, based on statistical attributes, independent of there's any entity in existence or was in existence which benefit does something related to these attributes? That's number one. That's the correct one. And then everything directed to that entity can be classified as worship and honoration and things of type worship, not honoration of type, the honoration you offer to the head of state or a messenger and things like that. Or worship it initially, then it must be defined, so it has nothing to do with the entity directed to. Just a sujood by itself. You sujood to a wall, then you worship the wall, which is manifestly absorbed. We'll discuss that, by the way, in a special subject. Or this is first and this first, with a circularity. And Ilah is the one who worship, and worship is directed to an Ilah. Which one is first, which is last? That's a circular. Because they don't come from, it's not like said, Rash is the son of Umar, and Umar is the father of Rash. This one is son and this one father. But these are two different entities, and they are connected by that Umar gave birth to Rash, for example, and this way Umar is the father and Rash is the son. Without giving birth, that's the joining point, there would be no definition of father and son. Before giving birth to Rash, Umar is a human being, cannot be called father. He's father of Rash, and Rash is the son of Umar. Because Umar is the one produced, okay, the production, the procreation, that's the fundamental concept. And the one who does the procreation is called father, and the one who is the result is called son. This is conjoint circularity, is not vicious circularity. We see that clearly. But here it is vicious, because if Ilah is invented from worship is different from Ilah, which source they come from? Nothing. So Ilah must be defined first, and then we know what's worship. Or worship is defined first, independent from any Ilah, and anything related to, we call it Ilah. And this is obviously circular. It's impossible. And we discussed examples up there which show that in Buddhist definition, the entity is an Ilah. Before that, have a certain attributes, and then but the action is made it an Ilah. So it is after the action. So before the action or after the action, that's impossible. At the same time, this is a vicious circle. That's the most clear impossibility ever. And the fourth one is just theoretical, that Ilah and worship is completely independent. Completely independent. That will contradict, obviously, the Quran and Sunnah, and does not make any sense for the perception of human being. Because usually worship is connected to Ilah in some sense, Allah connected to worship in some sense, but what is the sense? Which is one and the first? That they're completely independent is obviously contradict human nature and perception. And it was discussed earlier, I think, the independence. What does it entail? It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, just continue. This believer who submitted to Christ prostrated before him and rubbed his face upon the ground at his feet, seeking unseen benefit, never worshipped Christ at all. Thus his submission in seeking unseen benefit is not worship, nor is it permissible to call it worship. Rather, it is prohibited by Islamic law to designate it as worship, for doing so removes a legal term from its legal meaning. This constitutes a distortion of words from their proper places, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. Moreover, it removes the term from its linguistic meaning. This is a violation of the integrity of the Arabic language and usurpation, and an act that corrupts the understanding of the Quran. For the Quran was revealed in a clear Arabic tongue. Likewise, submission in itself is not worship to Allah, of Allah. For the man at the moment of the act did not even think of drawing near to Allah. Rather, his sole intention was to revive his deceased or to heal his sick, nothing more. He has indeed worshipped Allah, where he testifies to Christ's prophethood, thereby affirming Allah's sovereignty.
Yeah.
This remains his permanent state. However, his submission in that particular moment, in that particular place, is merely a permissible act.
Yeah, and we have also just this occasion coming to my mind. Thawban said, tell the Messenger of Allah very intensively for some time, hoping that one day he will ask me to ask him. So I said that day came and she asked me, ask me, you are serving me very well, and so on. And I said to him, Messenger of Allah, I ask you to be your companion in Jannah. It's not dedicated there to Allah. You cannot be in Jannah without Allah's permission and so on. That's in the background, nobody. And the Messenger said, I said, something else? Do you want something else? Leave this one. And I said, no, it's only that one I want. I don't want anything else. So he will look down for a long time. And then he said, help me with plenty of sujood. Sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Help me with, because maybe Thawban was not praying that much because he's in the sufa. The poor guys there at night, they pray and read Quran. And the day they go and bring firewood and give the poor and things like that. So they devoted to these rituals and so on and read the Quran. But the director said, I ask you to be your companion in Jannah. Ask you, not Allah to make you your companion. No need. It's very clear. And they say, Allah did not object that he's asking him directly. So we should ask Allah for that. No. Because he knows that Thawban knows that if he grants that, it's only by permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Muhammad does not have the keys of Jannah. It's in the hand of Allah anyway. So if he grants that, by Allah's permission. By necessity. There's no other way. Absolutely no other way. So no need for all these wishy-washy and all this story with Christ. Just the story of Thawban is enough to show that. He's addressing him directly with something which is the highest possible unseen benefit. Being a companion in paradise, enter paradise at least. And even in such a rank that he's a companion of the Prophet there, in the same level. Yeah, so that's another example. We don't need to go to Christ. Salawatullahi alayhi wa alihi. No. Muhammad is here with this hadith. Simple. And that example given by Nafi al-Awni is always speculative. It's very speculative. But our example is not speculative. It's happened really because the hadith is well established. Assume it has happened at least. So, right, I did not object.
Had he chosen to forgo it, it would have been permissible to leave it. It was not an act of worship since he did not intend to draw nearer to Allah through that specific action, nor did it result in any additional submission to Allah. Even though, without the slightest doubt, he remains in a state of perpetual submission to Allah due to his faith, just as when a person eats his intention.
We could say in this act, by kissing the hand of Christ or going to his feet, or in the case, the reviving story in, I think it's John, when he was late until Mary of the city near Jerusalem and so on rebuked him, said, I wrote to you long ago, and then you don't come, and my brothers are now dead for 4 days, buried. And she rebuked him, and he started, according to the narrative, started weeping deeply. His chest was giving a sound like a horse. He was very, 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 very pained. And then he said, and he turned and supplicated to Allah to revive the dead so that everyone present will recognize him as a messenger of Allah. But she did not address him as a messenger. She knows he can't do that. And she knows by belief. So her act is not worship to Christ. Actually, she rebuked him because he was late and he's dead. She wanted to hurry to heal him before he dies. And then he died. So, but asking him to come quickly to heal her is not worshipping Isa, and is also not worshipping Allah. But the fact that he believes that he can do with Allah's permission is the spiritual aspect of that. It gives her thawab for that belief. So we could say indirectly she's worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by requesting Isa to come, because my belief in Allah, that you are his messenger, you have this power given to Allah, I'm asking you to come. For that belief and so on, there's a reward. In that respect, she's worshiping Allah without directing anything to him directly in this vision. Yeah. So he's not seeking from Allah directly, so from Isa. According to the definition of Mu'allimi, she is worshipping Isa because it's matlab right, but she is not, because Isa is not a deity in her point of view, and she is not mushrik at all, and he did not rebuke her according to the story. It cannot be rebuked. It's very obvious. It's very obvious. So if Hatim al-Auni was aware about the detail of the story and he would take it from the Bible translation and put it, it would have clarified better than the example he gave.
I mean, they can always argue this is not valid because of the Bible, but then again, I mean, there have been numerous.
No, he give an example. Let's say one example that if it's reported correctly, then it doesn't. There's no need to believe it's not reported correctly, because he's giving a speculative example of reviving a dead. That's the case where reviving a dead, and she was asking to come before he dies, and then when he came and he died already, she rebuked him for coming late. The story is there. It's a very nice story. Asking him to come to hear her brother is also talab ghaibi. Sent him a letter quickly because he was far away. And then he was forced to cross the Jordan to avoid a tyrannical king and so on, and was delayed. The story is there. It's a very nice story. You can say that's narrated. If it's true, that's fine. If it's not, assume it has happened like that. Did the woman do anything like that? No.
As an example, as an academic example, I get you. Okay.
Because asking him to heal her brother where he far away and so on to come, that's not matlab ghaibi. She's not asking him to come and give him an injection or something. That would not matlab ghaibi. It's not an unseen benefit. They're asking for the unseen benefit, healing him immediately. That's definitely not according to the natural law. It's something supernatural. Matlab is unseen, is beyond human perception request. Yeah? So if this wishy-washy is coming from the fundamental error that divinity is not defined first. That's it. That's the only solution. All others will lead contradiction. Defining ibadah first will lead to contradiction, and there's no way to define what's ibadah in details unless you go invoke these obscure terms like matlab ghaibi, like unseen benefit, and so on. Obscure, and these are obscure and not clear, and they're connected to the belief in the entity addressed. So we're going back to belief and what's divinity there. No, so it becomes circular. Or you could divorce is just sujood to something, then you must include that sujood to a word is ibadah, and the word became divine, which nobody in the world will say. It will be absurd, as stated like that.
Continuing with the text, or when he relieves himself, he does so to fulfill the body's right by eliminating impurities. Neither of these actions removes him from his continuous state of submission to Allah as necessitated by his faith. Thus, all of this necessitates discarding al-Muallimi's definition entirely, and may peace, mercy, and blessing be of Allah descend upon you. In any case, we shall continue our examination of the example of prostration, whether to one's parents or to an idol or otherwise, in the next volume of this present series. Furthermore, we shall thoroughly analyze numerous actions that the Wahhabis falsely and slanderously designate as acts of worship, thereby declaring those who perform them to be disbelievers who are outside of the fold of Islam. We shall also continue to demonstrate the invalidity of al-Muallimi's definitions, as well as those of the Wahhabi in general concerning the matter of al-Ibadah, worship, and al-Ilah, God deity. This will be done without the slightest doubt, by the permission of Allah, upon whom we rely and through whom we seek assistance. But how did all this alarming confusion arise? The root of the crisis lies in the fact that Ibn Taymiyyah, whether justly or unjustly, denounced certain statements and actions such as al-istighathat bil-awliya, seeking intercession through the saints, and at-tawaf bil-quburihim, circumambulating their graves. Overcome by excessive zeal and a pathological obsession with deen, he lost sight of the warning of our master Abdul Qasim Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the seal of the prophets, upon whom and his families be prayers, salutations, and blessings from Allah. He said, advising and showing compassion, Beware of excess in deen, for indeed what destroyed those before you was excess in deen. Thus, Ibn Taymiyyah applied verses that were revealed regarding the mushrikeen, which describes their actions that merely bore an outward resemblance to the acts of those he labeled grave worshippers. He did so while neglecting Allah's command. This is 49:11. O you who believe, no one group of men should jeer at another, who may after all be better than them. No one group of women should jeer at another, who may after all be better than them. Do not speak ill of one another. Do not use offensive nicknames for one another. How bad is it to be called a mischief maker after accepting faith? Those who do not repent of his behavior are evildoers. Thus, he applied these verses to the people of Islam exactly as did the early Khawarij. This was because he read the Quran superficially, without true understanding, without absorption, without comprehension, and without deep contemplation or enlightened thought. It was
regurgitating.
It was reading of. Sorry, I was just distracted. It was a reading of those who recite the Quran, but it does not pass beyond their throats. Those who devote themselves to worship and toil in it, they seek to impress people, and they are impressed with themselves. Those about whom it was said, "You would consider your prayer and fasting insignificant compared to theirs." Thus, he disregarded the historical context in which these verses were revealed. Among its most essential components were the theological doctrines of the mushrikeen. To make matters worse, Ibn Taymiyyah lacked extensive knowledge regarding the true nature of shirk among the Arabs, despite boasting otherwise, as seen in his words set out in Iqtida al-Sirat al-Mustaqim, where he said, "Whomsoever wishes to learn about the conditions of the mushrikeen in their worship of Awthan, to understand the reality of shirk, associating partners with Allah, a matter that Allah has condemned in its different guises, in order to understand the ta'wil, interpretation of the Quran, to know what Allah and His Messenger have rebuked, one should look into the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and concerning the condition of the Arabics during his time, to consider what Al-Azraqi has mentioned in his book Akhbar Makkah, and other than him from the scholars." That's from Ibn Taymiyyah.
But he didn't do that. We did that in the chapter about Shirk al-Arab, and we show the reality.
At the same time, the man in stark contrast, this is your statement, to the compound ignorance of Miao, Muhammad ibn Wahab, as among the intellectual elites of the world and the preservers of the Sunnah. He had notable contributions in the science of logic, kalam, and tasawwuf, and even made some original additions. Moreover, he possessed exceptional skill in debate, along with an audacity in making grand claims, such as his habitual assertion, "This is the view of the Salaf," or even more extreme, "This is the doctrine of the Prophet ﷺ." This occurred in an era when the memorization of classical texts and their commentaries was widespread, and scholarly discourse was limited to repeating the statements of predecessors. However, he distinguished himself from the majority of scholars of his time, who were confined to their ivory towers, by engaging in public affairs, confronting rulers, and fighting the Mongol. Thus, there was no one who could restrain him. As a result, he emerged from the people with his innovation, which consisted of inverting the principle of divinity and lordship, along with his accursed and heinous tripartite division. To Allah belongs the ultimate prerogative of command. So was that in relation to Abdul
Ibn
Wahab?
Taymiyyah. Kind of Ibn Taymiyyah. No, Ibn Taymiyyah. It's kind of Ibn Taymiyyah. No, Ibn Taymiyyah is far away from that.
Yeah, I was just thinking the time.
Unbounded.
But your condemnation there, in terms of seems to, yeah, usually that condemnation is more for Miao.
Yeah, naturally, yeah. This is. He's not that ignorant like Miao. He's not that obsessed like Miao. He's not so simple and narrow-minded like Miao. Vastly from that. And actually, the term Abad al-Qubur or Gibreel worship was used by him not to claim that they are mushrik out of the fold of Islam. No, it is just like a slander. That's the reason I've got the ayah about don't jeer, men should not jeer about men and so on. is jeering, essentially. He never said that they are out of the fold of Islam in that strict sense. But like a slandering word. Well, he likes slandering in various things. Ibn al-Wahhab, no, for him is serious. It's mushrik kafir, and he wage war and kill them, exterminate them. Yeah.
Okay. So this concludes this chapter. I think it's a good point to stop the main part of the halakha.
What's the time now?
The time is 9:45.
That's enough for today.
Yeah, it's just because it was quite a long chapter. I think it's good to let that just state.
Yeah.
Next week will be there's a number of shorter chapters which we can plow through. Okay. Okay. So if anyone's got any questions on what's been discussed or general questions, we can allow that. If anyone wants to discuss any dawah matters as well, we can. If you have an expression, there's no one really here that's the regulars, so for dawah, but feel free, inshallah. Okay, so I'll allow everyone to unmute now. I mean, if you want to, Sheikh, also, if you just wait after that, if you want to add anything to what's been said so far, then feel free as well. Yeah. Okay. All right. Far away, bro.
Yeah, just going to ask. So, in regards to, just like, does your view coincide basically with more or less with Sheikh Fatim's view on ibadah, and but I'm guessing it will be different in ilah, right? And is there more on this Sheikh Fatim's view later on in the book?
Sheikh Hassan Malki, you mean?
Sheikh Fatim al-Auni.
Hatim al-Auni, yeah. What? No, he's trying to refute that, give the example of Christ. That's it. And the discussion is okay with this Mahir something. Yeah, it's but he did not go deeper than that. I think we have got that to the deepest possible level with the discussion previously, not in this section. This section just to clarify Muallimi, because he seems to be regarded as an important authority for the Wahhab, supreme authority.
Yeah. No, I find it interesting that you have some basically agreement with him on this topic. It's quite interesting. But yeah, Jazakallah khairan.
So Hatim al-Auni is essentially sharing our point of view, but because he's in Mecca and so on, he doesn't want to be very confrontational. It's maybe political consideration and security consideration. But I think on the other hand, he is still, let me say, he's still relatively developing, because in his PhD about al-Mursal al-Khafi and so on, we studied Hassan al-Basri. It's a good study generally. It lacks some aspects in scholarship, but it's good study. But when he comments about certain people, say this is Mubtadi', we don't adopt him and things like that, which is not warranted there. So he's just repeating the Salafi point of view at that time. But I think he matured out of that slowly. He's not getting out of that a bit by bit. People are still not going to the root problem and going to the fundamental points, what we did in the book. But anyway, as I said, the discussion, because there's the circularity and the relation with two concepts and so on, is a bit more on the philosophical side. But if someone needs, make a flow diagram, has a paper and say Uluhiyya first, and so how you can develop the other things, they develop consistently. Uluhiyya is then as defined. We have the primary deities, that's the one who is having a power to create and get away with his creation, or the one descent from such an entity. And the secondary, that's like idols. They are somehow conduit to the divine, or by containing, like Maryam being the mother of God. So he's a divine being then, because you cannot be mother of God without being divine in some sense, by containment, that Isa was in her belly. That's the reason the Nestorian, who believed that Isa became divine or was adopted on the baptism, not on before birth. So she did not have any divine being in her belly. So he was refusing to call her mother of God. They regard that as shirk in the story, which is consistent with his point of view, that he became a son of God, whatever son of God means for him, divine or not divine, on baptism, not before birth. So she was not containing anything divine. So she cannot be called mother of God, no. And then hulul and ittihad, that somebody or some being divine will insert with him like oil in a bottle without me, or mix completely, like mixing, as they say, vinegar with wine, or water with wine. It's completely mixed. That's the example they give. Hulul, ittihad, in containment, like and the conduit connection. We mentioned that before we talk about idols. Remember that? The primary the definition of divinity, and secondary because they regard it as divine because they connect to other divine, either conduit or containment or hulul. I don't know what to say. Hulul, insertion maybe, or union. Yeah. And we mentioned that when discussing idols and things like that, and also discussing the ayat al-tamanu. So beside the primary divinity, and the Quran refutes the primary divinity. There is no other divinity primary one. If there is no primary one, then all these secondary ones are just nonsense. Yeah, that's false. Nonsensical. All of them are nonsensical, so no need to address them. But they are scattered the Quran here and there and mentioned and so on. But the primary one is the fundamental one.